Every once in a while, I get a viewer request for a retro achievement set, and sometimes I agree to it before getting around to making a video on it within the next 2 years or so. So today, let's take on the viewer request for Mario Kart Double Dash, a game I have fond memories of due to some intense 4-player chaos back in the day. But before we break down strategies, techniques, and my retro achievements progress, there's an elephant in the room to address. I normally have no problem recording GameCube or PS2 games, but Mario Kart Double Dash is a bit different, and I don't fully understand why. I have no problem recording F-Zero GX or even Mario Kart Wii, but for Double Dash, unfortunately the footage quality starts to get very pixelated once the speed, drifting, items, and particle effects all begin to ramp up. So yeah, the footage is a bit scuffed, but after having such a good time with the F-Zero GX video, I figured it was time to stop procrastinating and make this one. It is what it is, but most importantly, it's still going to help people master the set. But enough talking, time to begin the set. The best kart in the game is undoubtedly the Barrel Train, which is unlocked after getting a gold trophy on the 150cc Star Cup, so I just go straight into that. It wasn't pretty since the controls here are a bit more slippery than modern entries, and my first track upon playing this game for the first time in over 20 years was an ice level, but my fundamentals, and especially my ability to drift around every single corner, were strong enough to easily pull off a gold. I also realized pretty quickly that the Koopas were my favorite racers. Each character has access to a unique item, with varying degrees of usefulness. The Koopas get access to triple green and triple red shells, which may not be as flashy, but they're incredibly versatile both offensively when taking out racers, or defensively by guarding against items behind you. You also have a good chance to pull them out regardless of your current standing, unlike other powerful items that tend to only appear when you're in the lower rankings. But in addition to retro achievements requiring a perfect score for every single cup on every single difficulty, you also need a specific character and kart combination for 150cc in mirror mode. In other words, they didn't want someone to only use the Barrel Train and Koopas for 99% of the set. And you know what? Fair enough. I did like how it actually encouraged me to play around with vehicles and characters that I otherwise would never touch, but some of the choices were a bit confusing. There was more than one moment of needing to beat a cup normally to unlock the very same vehicle that would then be required for the achievement, forcing me to play it twice. To be fair though, I can't think of a better way to spread it all out evenly so that you're covering every single kart and racer, while also not having overlap. And it's not like any of these were too difficult. The Grand Prix are pretty short, and only one of them took more than one attempt. Well, at least until we get into the All Cup Tour, but I decided I would save those until after I was done with all of the staff ghosts, because in theory, my fundamentals would be so strong that I would just be stomping the enemy AI outside of a few unlucky item barrages, and this ended up being the smart play. Because some of these staff ghosts do not mess around. You're not only building up the skill to take the optimal paths consistently, but it taught me that I was drifting wrong the entire time. I was just always trying to mini-turbo as often as possible, but sometimes less is more, especially on these harder tracks. There were plenty of times where a regular drift, or even a medium drift, was better than committing to a full mini-turbo. So let's go through them level by level. Luigi Circuit is straightforward enough. So much so that we're just going to use a heavy kart instead. Heavy karts don't have the acceleration, mini-turbo, or off-road abilities that the light karts do, but their huge advantage is their higher top speed, making them best on levels with very few turns. The chain chomp won't lunge at you in time trial, so by maintaining straight shots and performing tight drifts around the two main turns, you'll eventually outspeed the staff ghosts on specs more so than tech. On laps 2 and 3, I like to take a drift into the side road, and then boost into the grass before drifting into a mini turbo out of it. Before you know it, our first staff ghost is done. And our next ghost is not only easier, but is what I consider to be the easiest staff ghost in the game, Peach Beach. So we're going to tackle a second achievement during this one, defeating any staff ghost of your choice without using your mushrooms. Once again, we're ignoring the lightweight tips and going heavy, because you only need 3 drifts per lap. The initial turn, by the Coral Arch, and the final turn. Plenty of straightaways in between to cap out the heavyweight speeds and get both achievements with relative ease. And while Peach Beach was one of the easiest time trials, we then abruptly shift into one of the hardest time trials, Baby Park. There's an advanced technique called A-teching, which involves letting go of the A button in between drifts, allowing you to pull off some crazy fast driving, but I never figured it out. In theory, you can beat this with only 1 drift per turn, but realistically, you want to copy the staff ghost and get 2. This means that you have to perform 4 fairly precise drifts per lap, and even a single mistake can be the end of your attempt. Some people recommend using your boost right away so you know how close you are to the ghost, but I disagree with that. Instead, I save the mushrooms for when I make a slightly suboptimal boost in order to correct course and save the run. Getting a feel for that second boost will take some time. My way of getting a feel for drifting on the straightaways was to boost off the initial turn, and then hold the stick in the opposite direction to straighten out. You'll eventually get a feel for it through trial and error for when to let go of the stick and begin drifting in the opposite direction so you don't slide all over the place. Even after you do figure it out though, unfortunately, the best advice for this course is get good. So don't feel discouraged if you have to save this one for near the end. Then we have Dry Desert, which isn't too difficult so long as you're not trying to form a route completely blind. There's a lot of off-road driving utilized here to save time, and with your superior barrel train, you have a decent amount of room for error. Basically, the sand just off of the main track is fair game for driving. You'll take 2 mini turbos around the initial boulder, and then proceed to snake your way around the entire S-bend. I prefer the left side for the quicksand, so I perform 2 mini turbos there, and then we have the hardest turn of the race, the drift between the right pokey and the column. Drift too far in and you'll spin out, but too far out and you'll come to a complete stop. You gotta get a feel for threading that needle and not second guessing yourself, because hesitation is the enemy. For lap 1, we then chain 3 mini turbos at the end, then lap 2 is more or less the same for most of it, and you don't need to worry about the tornado thanks to your off-road skill. The big difference for laps 2 and 3 are that after threading the needle, you're then gonna head just inside the right side of the left post of the sign and mushroom boost through. Ideally you want a mini turbo out of it too, but I screwed it up on both laps and still made it. I even messed up some other turns on lap 3 and still got the achievement, showing just how overall generous this staff coast is once you get that one tricky turn done and once you understand the route. Moving on to the Flower Cup, our first course is Mushroom Bridge, and unexpectedly, this ended up being a heavyweight win. While there are a number of twists and turns that would suggest that the barrel train is better, me being able to make my own straight paths and hit that 57 mph speed tier for an extended period of time from the final stretch into the beginning of the next lap is just too good for me to pass up, and you'll see how it pulls through at the end. As far as shortcuts go, the path on the right isn't actually any faster, so we just save our mushroom for the straightaway at the very end, which is also what the staff ghost does. And we absolutely aren't going to take the boost over the bridge at the end. Speaking of, I was kind of surprised to see that there was no achievement for successfully riding it all the way through. I feel like there are a number of ways that you could make that achievement happen, but I digress. Back to the staff ghost, on the final lap here, you'll see just how much of a difference a few extra miles per hour can make. But this is the final course that won't be utilizing the standard barrel train strat, and will absolutely be needing the off-road and mini turbo power that the barrel train provides for Mario Circuit. Thankfully the Chomp and Piranha Plant won't actively attack you in time trial. This was the first track where defeating the staff ghost felt more like solving a puzzle of figuring out where the staff ghost is being inefficient, and then capitalizing on it by being slightly more optimal with your trajectories. I take 2 drifts at the start, and then we encounter the opponent's biggest mistake, not going as far in on the shortcut as possible. Usually they do it on lap 2 and 3, but I prefer lap 1 and 2. I also like to prepare a mini turbo during the mushroom boost so that I can get a second boost out of the grass and maximize just how much track I can cut on the shortcut. Then we snake a bit through the tunnel, but I don't go too crazy on it, and then I perform 2 more mini turbos. Then I try to drive straight through the final series of bends before performing 1 final mini turbo, and it's no big deal if you drift into the dirt. It took me a bit to get this staff ghost down, but once it all clicks, you're good to go. But now it's time for a much bigger challenge with Daisy Cruiser. The toughest part is going to be hitting the inside of the pool edge for all 3 laps, something I didn't even realize you could do until starting this achievement set. Once you get this part down though, you at the very least have what it takes to stand a chance against the staff ghost. If you botch the mini turbo completely as you hit the wall, don't be afraid to use the mushroom boost as a bailout, because there are no shortcuts here that explicitly require one. Aside from that, the other potential challenge is just knowing where the tables are going to be on each lap. After that, there's plenty of room for mistakes if you hit a wall or fail a mini turbo here and there, and this was actually one of my favorite staff ghosts because the challenge level for it feels just right. Then our next course is Waluigi Stadium, and the time here is pretty generous, but you need to get a feel for drifting as you're bouncing off the bumps so you don't accidentally drift in too hard. You'll be tempted to use your mushroom in this shortcut, but hold off on it until later in the lap. After turboing around the curve, we get some snaking action across the piranha plants while avoiding the fire. Then next up is another bouncing drift, and then here is where we want to use our mushroom before drifting into the final turn. So yeah, pretty straightforward staff ghost. On the final lap I even botched the final turn pretty horribly, and still had enough time to spare and get our achievement. Moving on to Sherbert Land, this one is pretty easy as long as you don't completely choke on the Shy Guys, and you can remember that this is one of those less is more moments. It may be tempting to chain a bunch of mini turbos, but very few are actually required to complete this. For this course especially, I like to think of drifting as a means to minimize your distance traveling much more than it is a means to accumulate speed boosts. As far as optimal mushroom timing goes, I like to save it right before the drift onto the final ice segment so I can either bail out of a bad drift or boost into the straightaway, before pulling out one final drift. After this nice and easy win, we have a tougher one next with Mushroom City. Well, not tougher as far as the staff goes time itself goes. In fact, this stage is another candidate for the win with no mushrooms achievement. But the challenge of each lap is finding a smooth way through the alleyway near the beginning, and I like to do it in 2 separate mini turbos, using a mushroom as a bailout if needed, but I ended up not needing it. Then we have a series of predictable drift choices, followed by a straight shot into the final drift. If you didn't need the mushroom for the alleyway in the beginning of the lap, you can use them at the end instead. Another personal favorite track of mine. Then we go from one personal favorite track to another with Yoshi Circuit. The less is more mentality applies here as well, but you'll still be performing quite a few mini turbos. The ideal mushroom boost location for this course is pretty obvious, and it doesn't matter which 2 laps you choose. Then we have several predictable drift timings, but really try to straighten out when moving along the back of Yoshi's head. I try to maintain a straight path along the top of the tail, and around the bottom of the tail is the only time I try to sneak in an extra mini turbo. It's not necessary, but it does add up quite a bit over 3 laps. There's plenty of leniency on this one, and you can fail plenty of mini turbos, because it's more about hitting the shortcut and finding the straight paths. So after 3 decent enough laps, we get another achievement. And our final course for this cup is Decayed Mountain, which is perhaps one of the most divisive staff ghosts in terms of difficulty. The time is generous enough, and I was behind for the first 2 laps before coming back. Also, if you really want, there's a skip on the S-bend descent that you can learn to really shave off time, but I didn't bother with it. Inversely, in order to win this, you need strong fundamentals, the ability to handle bouncing drifts, and the ability to make on-the-spot adjustments, because I don't think a single lap played out exactly the same as the previous lap. After the cannon, you want to hug the right side a bit, and I never even paid attention to the boulders, and it just never became an issue or got in my way, thankfully. For each drift on the S-bend, you just gotta get a feel for if you should mini turbo. I use my mushrooms on the grass at the beginning, on any 2 laps of my choice, and despite some egregious errors throughout my run, I still emerge victorious. And with the Star Cup complete, next up is the Special Cup, and we begin with the chaotic but fun Wario Colosseum, spanning such a long track length that it's the only course that only has 2 laps per race. The staff ghost time is pretty generous, but getting the turns can have a slight learning curve, especially since you'll have a bit of variance for some on each lap. While I do get a few mini turbo chains going, the less is more mentality for the most part works more often than not. The first mini turbo chain is no big deal if you miss it, and I miss it about 50% of the time anyways. For the Super Mega Ultra Spiral, I like to do just one big drift, but it's no big deal if you don't end up in the optimal spot because a mini turbo will bail you out. Then for this turn, I prefer one big drift, but if you start too late, you can split it into 2 to not fall off. Once we make it past the jump for this boost, I prefer one super long drift and then riding it all the way down to the drop off. Then since I'm expected to take a speed loss on the drop anyways, this is when I prefer to use one of my mushrooms on both laps. And this is always where I secure my biggest lead over the staff ghost. I ignore the pit completely and try to chain a few mini turbos, but it's absolutely not necessary, and a straight shot through also works. Then for our final turns, I take a few mini turbos along the way here, but again, it's not too necessary unless you're pretty far behind. But again, that mushroom timing helps so much that my lead is too strong even with a slight bonk at the end of the lap. But now we go from a chill and fun course to what is effectively the final boss of the staff ghosts, Dino Dino Jungle. In terms of difficulty, this one is a huge step up from the rest. In my opinion, nothing else comes even close. If you can beat this one, you can beat them all. Not only are there a number of independent sections and components to figure out, some that vary a bit depending on the lap number, but you'll need not only precision, but confidence to consistently hit everything. This is also one of the few courses where the less is more mantra just doesn't apply here, because a big key to my success was to find opportunities that the staff ghosts missed to sneak in extra mini turbos, while inversely, knowing when to bail to save your speed. Because getting a perfect lap 3 times in a row is going to be extremely difficult and you should not count on it happening. As you might imagine, the big run killer is going to be when you take the middle of the 3 bridge paths in the first half of the lap, because the slightest hesitation or overcorrection is almost certainly a game over. Now onto the mushrooms. With only 2 boosts, you have to choose which laps you want to take the shortcut on. I just use them on laps 2 and 3, but your preferences may vary depending on how you handle the geysers. Then past the bridge on this final turn, it's going to play out one of 2 ways. Either an early drift into a mini turbo, or a late one at 2/3 power. Either way, you want to steer to about the center so that you don't hit the wall. Then for the final set of geysers, I like to keep my hang time as low as possible by driving in between them. Fast forward a bit, and we have my sloppiest of the 3 laps. Again, the hardest part is pulling off all of the tricks all 3 laps in a row. And I choked a number of times before finally getting 3 successful laps in a row. And there were probably dozens of failed attempts right on the lap 3 bridge. And then on the final turn, I almost went too far and hit the wall, but all of those extra time savers on the first 2 laps really do add up. And with that, the toughest staff ghost is finally done. After Dino Dino Jungle is Bowser's Castle, and this one is a challenge, and arguably one of the harder ones, but it was one of the most fun ones to beat. And the techniques you learn will stay with you afterwards, basically making this a free course when we go to the Grand Prix. As you can see, you can hug the wall for 2 easy mini turbos at the beginning, and then for the spiral ascent, just pick a spot and hope for the best. I don't do anything too fancy with the fireballs, but you can drive through them if they're fully perpendicular to you. Here I like to perform one huge 180-degree drift, and then for the next 2 turns, I only drift at 2/3 power to avoid hitting the far wall. If you forget and you do end up bonking, this ends up being a good spot to use a mini turbo to save your speed. Then for the big trick. You might think you need a mushroom for the drop off here, but you don't. This is another good mini turbo spot if you haven't perfected the speed saving aspect yet. And after the jump, this patch of grass is theoretically one of the best spots. But I prefer the defensive speed savers, and you can compensate this a bit by chaining an extra mini turbo into the next lap. Really the big hurdle is just getting that drift jump all 3 times in a row. Then to a lesser extent, not hesitating on the fire bar or the extra wide turns. It's a very fair challenge, and you'll be an absolute beast on this course by the end. And now it's time for our final course, Rainbow Road. I use my boost right away on the first drop on lap 2 and 3. I cannot stress this enough, less is more. This is the first of only 3 mini turbos I will use per lap. You don't need to hit every single boost pad, and you don't want to overcorrect if you miss a few. You'll be fine simply because you outspec your opponent here, and because you understand that less is more. We use our second mini turbo at the end of the S-bends into the launcher. Then we have more boost pads which are even easier to hit than the previous section. And then after the jump, we begin our final mini turbo with one final drift into the end. Keep this up for 3 laps, and the seemingly difficult level really ends up not being all that bad. I'd even call it a bit anticlimactic because I expected it to be brutal. But with that, every single staff ghost has been defeated. But before our final major obstacles, let's make sure to complete all of the miscellaneous tasks. Some of these you probably did already, either without even knowing it was an achievement before unlocking it, or because you needed something casual in between the staff ghosts. Using all of the not shortcut pipes, winning a race without drifting, winning a race without mini turbos or items, and winning a race without hitting obstacles or enemy items. But the final 2 in this category have a bit more strategy to it, if you want to call it strategy. Using the lightning item twice before winning a race, and using the blue shell on yourself in first place. I did both of these on Wario Colosseum, and if you're really lucky, you could theoretically get both in the same race, but not likely. You'll receive stronger items when you're in lower rankings, so chilling near the starting double box sounds like the way to go, right? Well, you may not pull them quickly, and then when you finally get them, it may be too late to catch up. So there's kind of a middle ground of farming a location a few times, driving forward a bit to the next spot, and so forth. It's kind of just an RNG fest at the end of the day, and I didn't hate these achievements, but I understand why some people don't like them. But now it's time to return back to the Grand Prix, because there are 2 cups remaining for us. The All Cup Tour, and the All Cup Mirror Mode. And these are what I feared the most, getting a perfect 160 points on both. A single bad race due to getting spammed with items, and you're starting all over again from square one. The first course is always Luigi Circuit, and the last course is always Rainbow Road. Everything else in between is random. But that's not the worst part. It's not just the fact that you need a perfect 160 points, it's the fact that you need to do it with one of the worst combinations in the game. The one course you want to get sooner rather than later is naturally going to be Baby Park, because that's the one course where it feels like you're either going to be almost an entire lap ahead in first, or you're going to be in dead last due to item after item. I feel like every achievement hunter inevitably has a moment where they're trying a challenge for hours upon hours to no avail. Then after taking a break and coming back the next day, their first attempt of the next day ends up being a win. And that's exactly what happened to me. Though I did have a few close calls on my winning run. And then my first visit to Rainbow Road on this achievement was a war story. Because first I messed up by drifting too hard and then I ended up going the wrong way, which set me back. Then shortly after I finally catch back up again, I get knocked off the course, which set me so far back that it took me until the third lap to even begin catching back up. But then I choked and overcorrected on the spiral on the third lap, knocking me to third. Given that I was already halfway done with the lap, I was going to need some incredibly good item pulls in order to stand a chance of catching back up. But then I pulled the triple mushroom. And right before the launcher, I swap for a second item, and I pull a fourth mushroom. But I see that enemy fake item block, and know that I have another one to worry about up ahead. I have to find the perfect moment to boost through before they can throw it back at me. I find my moment, boost through to first, and then use the triple mushrooms down the final spiral, giving me just enough time to finally complete this. After that, I couldn't help but just stare at the results screen, because I did not think I was going to pull that off. I take a break, and then prepare for my final achievement on my final day, doing the exact same thing, but in mirror mode. But with most of my training being on the normal versions of the courses, I knew that I was in for an even longer time. Or so I thought. This actually ended up being a first attempt clear, in part because you actually have a vehicle combination that doesn't suck. The boot pipes are almost like a heavyweight vehicle that function more like a lightweight vehicle, so the stats are much easier to work with. And on top of that, Boo and PD Piranha both had the ability to draw any other special item. So in other words, not one of the worst items in the game. I also kind of wonder if they just didn't have that same level of playtesting for the enemy AI in mirror mode, because they were making driving mistakes that I just was not expecting from the highest difficulty of racers. But I'm not complaining, and I can finally say that we have another Retro Achievement set mastered. Overall, this was a satisfying set to overcome, between the time trials and the perfect scores. Naturally though, the All Cup achievements are a bit controversial, so let's answer the two big questions. Do I think that this is more skill versus luck based, and do I think that these should be 100-point achievements? And well, I might not give an answer that a lot of people like. Is it skill or is it luck? Well, obviously the answer is a bit of both, but I do strongly believe that it is more skill than luck. The more skill you have, the less luck you need. And people do speedrun the All Cup Tour, where they're consistently winning most of the time. It's not an easy achievement by any means, but the only level that I would just call almost pure luck is Baby Park. But Bowser's Castle, for example, on my winning run, I got hit by a blue shell 4 times in a single race, and I still had no problem getting first. The other question though is, do I think that these should be considered 100-point achievements? Comparing it to other achievements I've unlocked, it's definitely a step up from King K. Rool Damageless in Donkey Kong 64, but it's not quite as hard as the 3-day challenge of Majora's Mask. I think they're fine as 50-pointers, because the normal and the mirror mode ones are so similar that really that's just one combined 100-point challenge. If you can do one, you can easily do the other, so I think the point scoring for it is fine as is. And interestingly enough, there are 10 Staff Coast achievements that have lower unlock rates than the perfect 150cc mirror mode All Cup Tour. My only real grievance with these achievements is being forced to use one of the worst kart combinations in the game. I feel like if you had any sort of freedom of choice, most of the debate would be over. And ultimately, compared to some other Mario Kart sets on the site, Double Dash isn't really that bad in comparison. But you definitely gotta love this game to want to go the extra mile for the mastery. On a final note unrelated to Retro Achievements, when I bought this game, it came with a bonus disc too. And what makes it unique compared to other demo discs is that this one has a feature to transfer bonus items into Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance via the link cable. Just a random fun fact I thought I'd share. But with that, that's all I got for this video. I've got some huge projects in the works, including the deceptively brutal Boom Blocks, as well as me possibly being the very first person in the world to 100% Animal Crossing on the GameCube legitimately without any time traveling or glitches. So don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and hype for more Retro Achievements content. And until next time, watch out for those blue shells.